Hello everybody. So today we are going to learn about ABAP work processes. How many work processes are there? What are the services? So as you see in this slide, the ABAP work processes are dailog, update, enqueue, spool and background and the two other processes which runs behind these 5 work processes, and they are dispatcher and message server. We will discuss each about. Okay, so let me do a practical. So the first one is, like as I said, it is a dailog work process. So there should be minimum 2 dailog work processes required per dispatcher that need to be configured per instance. This work process executes the transaction as required and communicates with the database instance process. So as I have discussed before that about the instance. Okay, so we need to have a database instance, we need to have the application instance. Okay, and what are the central instance, what are the services are required for running those central instance. Okay, so we need to have minimum 2 dailog work processes. If you configure less than 2, then your recipe won't start at all. It could create a problem. Then again you have to configure that to at least 3, 4, 5. Okay, so minimum you need to keep at least 2 dailog work processes. Okay, so second is background work processes. Background work processes, this is nothing but a background work processes executes programs that run without interacting with the user. At least 2 background processes are required for each SAP system. More than 1 background work process for each dispatcher can be configured. So if you see, when you work in the company, you will see a lot of users are working on the SAP system. So they usually, whenever they do anything, it will first go to the dailog work process. Okay, because in the dailog work processes, it will do the activity immediately. So for example, if you are running any program which is taking more than 10 minutes, then you need to set that program in background work process. Otherwise, what will happen if you are running any long programs in a dailog work process, then you will get dumps. Okay, you will get errors, you will get issues, and program will be interrupted, program will be corrupted. So a lot of issues will be arising there. So keep in mind that when you are configuring the dailog work processes, the user who is running the program more than the 10 minutes, I mean like more than 600 seconds, he needs to run that program in the background work process. That's why we schedule background work processes. The reason why we are I'm talking about background process means, if you see in the daytime, lot of the users are logging into the machine. Okay, lot of users are working, and in the night time nobody is working. So if you see, we will be learning the operation mode where we can, for example, say if we have 3 dailog work processes, right? If you have 3 dailog work processes, or say 5, and if you have 2 background work processes running in a day. Okay, so what you can do, you can switch automatically the dailog to 2 and background to 5 in the night time. So in this way, it will be easy for everybody, and their programs will run in a particular time given by them. So this is very, very important concept regarding this, and how we are going to change these configuration settings we'll be learning in the chapter operation modes. Okay, so just here I was explaining about the difference between dailog and background work process. And the third process is, we call it as enqueue work process. So basically NQ work process, only one NQ process exists in each SAP system, because this process ensures that updates are serialized with the help of a log table. Okay, so one NQ process will be in the SAP system. So, and the fourth work process is update work process. What is update work process is how it indicated, as I said, like dialog indicated by D, background is work process indicated by letter B, NQ work process indicated by E, and update work process indicated by V. Okay, not U, I will tell, because in update work process we have V1 and V2 they define. Okay, so you need to have minimum one update process and more than one process per dispatcher is allowed. So this process takes care of processing update requests. So this basically take care of your update request. Okay, so you need to have a minimum one update work processes. Next, fifth work process is what we call as a spool work processes, and this is indicated by S. Okay, so minimum one spool process is required and more than one process per dispatcher is allowed. This process passes sequential data to output devices such as printers. So here when you learn the topic printers, there we come across this spool work process. And when you are learning the background jobs, scheduling background jobs, you will come across that background work process. And when you are learning about the dialog work process, you will learning how to set up the dialog work processes, how to set the parameters for this. You all are going to see this. Okay, so now these are the 5 work processes. As I said, apart from this, there are other 2 processes. We call it as a dispatcher work process. What is dispatcher work process? There is one dispatcher work process per application instance, okay, and per each dialog instance. This is very, very important. I will write it. I mean, like, there should be minimum one dispatcher work process for application, per application, and you need to have per dialog instance. So you need to have a minimum of one dispatcher work process per application instance and per each dialog instance. If there is one central instance and two dialog in an SAP system, then there will be 3 dispatchers, right? So that is what I am telling. So you need to have one dispatcher per application and per dialog instance. So if you have one central instance and 2 dialog instance in an SAP system, then there will be 3 dispatchers. So what is the role of dispatcher? The role of dispatcher is to distribute incoming requests to the abap work threads. So this is a very big concept, and the main role of dispatcher. SAP sometimes won't start if dispatcher unable to get the incoming requests, right, from the abap work processes. So if the dispatcher starts, then all the abap work process will start. Okay, so when you know how to start and stop the SAP system, you need to see how many processes are running, okay, how many dialogues, how many background are there in a server. Okay, so you will be seeing all those things in practical. So I hope you understand the processor. And lastly, I told that there is one more we call as a message server. So what is message server? Message server is also a kind of process, and you will have only one message server exists in the SAP system, and it is installed on the central services instance. So what is the role of message server? Means it is basically responsible for communication between the dispatcher of each SAP instance within the same SAP system. So as I said, like when you start the SAP system, the message server will talk to dispatcher to get the incoming request from all the abap work processes. Okay, so this is, you need to have minimum one message server. Okay, So this is how the work process has been designed in such a way that you know what the purpose, what's the role of dialog, what's the role of background, and queue, update, is pull, and so and so. So as you see there, you know, when SAP uses basically the acronym DVEBMGSXX. So if you know this, you no need to learn. If how many work processes are there means like simply DVEBMGS. What is that? Nothing but dialog, update, and queue, background, message, gateway, and spool. Okay, I forgot to tell about the gateway also. When it's gateway, what is a gateway? Basically, gateway is you need to have exactly one gateway per dispatcher in an SAP system. So the gateway is nothing but it's used to allow communication between different SAP systems. So if you have more than one SAP system, then if you want to communicate with other systems, then you need to configure gateway. Okay, so that's why that gateway service also they will configure an SAP system. So you need to have exactly one gateway per dispatcher in an SAP system. So the gateway is, as I said, like it's usually communicate. Okay. So this is what it indicated by this acronym DVEBMGSXX. XX is nothing but your instance number. As I have told that XS is nothing but instance number. And in how many instance number will be there? From 00 to 99. You can create this number of instances. It's nothing but it denotes an SAP instance within the SAP system. So it required for SAP to run. So for example, if I say if an SAP system comprises of one central instance with number 01, okay, and I will take an example to more define. For example, in a SAP system, you have one central instance, right? And for one central instance, you are giving the instance number as 01, okay, and two dialog instance, right? With the number 02 and 03, right? Then the SAP system is said to be comprised of how? DVEBMGS01, okay. Similarly, DVEBMGS02, similarly 03 instances. So like this, you will get 3 instances. So as for 3 instances means you need to have a 3 dispatcher. So this is how the work process works. So in the further sessions, I will be going to explain each and every in detail, like background, work processes, and enqueue, update, spool, everything. Okay. So this is the overview of all the work processes and services which are needed for SAP to run. Thank you so much for attending this session. Hello everybody. So today we are going to see more detail about the work processes, how a processing will happen when a user sends a transaction to the application server. Okay, so this is a typical layout of presentation, application, and database. You can see when you log on to the SAP GUI, you will first connect to the application server, okay, where the dispatcher will pick up your information and then it sends to the database, okay, and fetch the data which you need and send it back to the user. So if you see here, the screen entries of a user are accepted by the presentation program SAP GUI. What it will do, it will convert that into the internal format, okay, and then it will forward it to the abap. So what the abap dispatcher will do, the abap dispatcher is the central process of abap. It manages the resources for the applications written in abap in coordination with the respective operating system. The main task of the abap dispatcher include the distribution of the request to its work processes, the integration of the presentation layer, and the organization of the communication transactions. So the dispatcher first saves the processing requests in request queues and then process them accordingly to the first in and first out. For example, at a time like 3 users are logging one by one. So what will dispatcher will do? It will first select the first user first in, and then it will select the second user, then it will go and so, and then it will send the processing back first out, and similarly second out and third. So the ABAP dispatcher distributes the request one after the other to the available work processes. Okay, so data is actually processed in the work process, whereby the user who created the request using the SAP GUI is not always assigned the same work process. I mean, like you first log into the work to the dailog and dispatcher process the request. Okay, so second time you won't be having that work process because it could be assigned to some other user, right? So you will be getting some other work process. So it's not necessary that you will be assigning that work process only. So there is no fixed assignment of work processes to the user. To process user request, it is often necessary to read data from the ABAP schema of the database. So in the database, there is the ABAP schema where it stores all the data of the users. So for this, every work process is connected directly to the ABAP schema of the database. So what happens once your process is complete, the result from the work process is sent to a dispatcher and back to the SAP GUI. So the SAP GUI interprets this data and generates the output screen for the user. Now you can see here the buffer. What is the role of buffer here? The buffers help to speed up processing of user request. Data that is often read but seldom changed. For example, say programs or customizing data such as clients or company codes can be kept as a copy of the database content in the shared memory of the application server. This means that the data does not have to read from the database every time it is needed, but can be called very quickly from the buffer. So each instance has its own buffer. Okay. Now, as we have seen the work processes, now I am talking about inside the work process what ABAP dispatcher and what the task handler does. So basically here if you see work processes executes the process logic of application programs. Okay, so in addition to the internal memory, a work process has a task handler that coordinates the actions within a work process, software processes and a database interface. Here the DynaPro processor executes the screen flow logic of the application program, and it calls the processing logic modules, and then it transfers that field content to the processing logic. So the actual processing logic of the ABAP application programs is executed by the ABAP interpreter. The screen processor tells the ABAP processor which subprograms need to be executed. So depending on the processing status of the screen flow logic, the dailog work process basically selected by the dispatcher, okay, then it performs a rolling of the user context first. That is the data that contains the current processing status of the running program, as well as the data that characterizes the user is made known to the work process. So what the work process will do then, it will then process the user request, which may involve, for example, say requesting data from the database, right, or from the buffers in the shared memory. So once the dailog work process has processed the dailog step, the work process returns the result, rolls the user context back out to the shared memory, and now it will be available again for a new user request from the request queue. So this is how a result is transferred to the SAP GUI and the user can see the new screen. So this is typically you're seeing what is happening inside the each individual work process, whether it is a dailog, whether it is a background or any other work process. Hope you understood this session, and we are going to see more about other work processes in our next Hello everybody. So as we discussed in our last session about how the processing will happen when a user log into the SAP GUI, and we have also seen the individual work process, what it will happen inside the work process. So now we are going to talk more about the NQ and log management. See, why I'm trying to make it clear, because these are the very important concept that every basis consultant needs to have the knowledge. Without the concept, it's very difficult to understand what you are doing. Okay, so that's the purpose I am trying to explain in a deep way. So here, NQ and log management. So basically, why you have seen in a work processes that we need to have at least minimum one NQ work processes. To ensure data consistency within an SAP system, you must ensure that data records cannot be accessed and changed by more than one user at any one time, right? To do this, the SAP system has its own log management concept. Now, from a database perspective, every dailog step forms a physical and logical unit, okay, like the database transaction. So the database log administration can only coordinate this type of database transaction, okay. This from the database perspective. So what will from the SAP point of view? So from the SAP point of view, however, this is not sufficient, because SAP transactions which are formed from a sequence of logically related work steps that are consistent in business terms are generally made up of several dailog steps which abapper do the programming, right? So SAP systems need to have their own log management, not only database, right? So this is implemented using this NQ work process. Now, the SAP log concept works on the principle that SAP programs make log entries for data records to be processed in the log table. So log entries can only be made if none already exist for the table entries to be logged. Here, the NQ work process manages the logical log of the transaction of the SAP transaction in the log table. The log table is located in the main memory of the instance within the NQ work process. If a user wants change access to data, the executing dailog work process requests a log. To do so, the application developer must program this request explicitly. So say if a dailog request is processed on the NQ server, the dailog work process can access the log table directly. If it now checks whether a new log can be generated, okay, that is whether there is a collision with the logs that have already been set. If a log can be set, the dailog work process creates it and the user log owner is given the log key. The log key is kept in the user context in the shared memory. So where is the log key? It will be kept in the shared memory. So if the dailog work process that process the user request and the NQ work process are not running on the same instance, then these two work processes communicate through the message server. Okay. So in this case, what happened? The log request is forwarded from the dailog work processes to the NQ via the dispatcher and the message server. So the NQ work process now checks whether a log can be set or not. If this is possible, then the log is set by the NQ work process and the log key transferred to the requesting dailog work process via dispatcher and message server. So when the log is requested, what happens? The system checks whether the requested log conflicts with existing entries in the log table or not. If the log table already contains corresponding entries, the log request is refused. So the application program can then inform the user that the requested operation cannot currently be executed because it is occupied by some other user. So this is what a concept. When one user accessing a data from the database, that means it is locked by that user. And so if any other user using the same data to be accessed, it won't allow. So that is the lock management happens in SAP. So there are different kinds of lock. So I will tell one by one and explain. Like there are write locks, okay, which we call it as a lock mode exclusive. What it does, basically the log data can be edited only by one user. Okay, the request for another write log and another read log are rejected. Right, a write log protects the log object against all types of other transactions. Only the same log owner can set the lock again, as I said just now. The second log is read log, which is nothing but log mode shared. What it means? For example, there several users can have read access to the log data at the same time. I mean, I'm talking about the read. Okay, if you are talking about the write, then only one user can at a time write the data. But in read, several users can have the read access to the log data at the same time. The request for additional read logs are accepted even if they are from the other users. Okay, but the write log in this case will be rejected. Okay, now the other type of log is we have enhanced write logs. It is nothing but log mode exclusive non-cumulative. Means while write logs can be successively requested and released by the same transaction, an enhanced write log can only be requested once, even by the same transaction. All other requests for logs are rejected. I hope you understood, right? And one more log, we call it as the optimistic logs. These are nothing but log mode optimistic. See, optimistic logs responds like read log at first and can be changed to write logs. An optimistic log is set if the user displays the data in change mode. So optimistic logs on the same object do not collide. If the user wants to save the change data, the optimistic log must be changed to the write log, right? So this fails if someone sets a non-optimistic log on the object before. So this is very important. And also logs set by the application program are either released by the application program itself or by the update program once the database has been changed. So logs that have been passed on an update work process in this way are also written to a file at operating system level and can therefore be restored if the in-queue server goes down. Okay, so how a person, like if the user wants to access the data and it needs urgency, then what? So you are, as a SAP basis consultant, you need to communicate with that user. How to check the logs? You have to go to the SAP SM12 is the transaction code for which displays the logs that are currently set. So if you hit SM12, okay, so it's asking the table name. So I'm just putting star. I mean, like not only DDS user, it could be any user, right? So and you have to mention the client. Okay, not 000, but you will provide with the client. Click on list. So it will show if there are any locked by any other users. Okay. So basically this is how it displays. If a log has already been inherited to the update process, the backlog can be set. So okay, see here there are no logs because no user has accessed any data from the database. So there are basically two ways of deleting logs held by the users. Either you can go from SM04 or you can go from SM12. So if you are finding any logs here, you can just go and delete those logs. Okay, you just click on the delete and you can delete those logs. and the other user can access it. So, but the process is that you need to communicate with the user. The username will be shown here. You can communicate with the user saying that the other user needs to access. So, if you have done with the work, then please log out from that database table. So, what you will do? You will email reference. Otherwise, you can go to SM04. Okay, SM04 is nothing but where you will see all the users. Okay, now currently I'm logging into only one user, so it's showing DDIC. So in a company, there will be more than 50, 80 users will be logging. You can see all the users here, and you can just go to the particular user and click on session, and you can end the session there. So this will also delete the log. So there are two methods, as I said, for deleting the log. Either you can go from SM12 and either you can go from SM04 and you can delete those logs. So I hope you understood the concept of enqueue. It was tricky, but you need to know the concept, how the log management will happen in the database, about the read log, write log, and other logs, as I explained. Thank you so much for attending this session. So in our next session, we'll be going to learn more about the other work processes. Bye. Hello everybody. So today we are going to learn about what is Internet Communication Manager and what is the use of this ICM in SAP environment. So basically the purpose of Internet Communication Manager is a communication between the SAP system and the outside world via the protocol HTTP, HTTPS, and SMTP. So you need the ICM if you want your SAP web application server to communicate with the internet via HTTP, HTTPS, or SMTP. Okay. So if you see here, if you go to your SAP MMC, there is Management Console. This is where you can see ICM, right? These are the status of the Internet Communication Manager. So as I said, like ICM is a component of the SAP web application server. It is implemented as a separate process which is started and monitored by the dispatcher. Okay. So in profile parameters, you can set whether the ICM is to be started and how to configure those things. Okay. Now, basically the thread you are seeing is nothing but it accepts the incoming TCP IP request and creates a worker thread from the thread pool to process the request. Then the thread control initialize the connection information data. So this is a layout of Internet Communication Manager, how it interacts with the web browser, abap dispatcher, and the Java dispatcher. So here, if you see, the web requests are received by the Internet Communication Manager. This HTTPS request can be processed either in the abap work process. For example, abap web dan pro applications are forwarded to the as Java in the as abap and Java system. Okay. So the ICM can use the URL to decide to where it forward the request. If it cannot reply to the request from its cache, if the request is to the Java environment, it is sent to the Java dispatcher, which you can see through 2B, which then forward to a Java server process, which you can see as 3B. So then the Java server process then refers to the Java schema, if applicable, and uses the Java dispatcher process to send the response back to the ICM. Finally, the ICM sends the response from the SAP system to the user who sent the request through file. So how it communicates from Java and back to the user who sent the request. If the request is to the ABAP runtime environment, the ICM forwards it to the ABAP dispatcher 2A, which then handles it like a typical SFAQ request, and then it sends back to the ICM, and then it will send it to the ICM will send it back to the user request, to the web browser. So this is how the ICM communicates outside the world using the protocol HTTP, HTTPS, and SMTP protocol. Thank you so much for attending this session.